What's going on, everyone? So, I want to close out this series by addressing a name that's actually been characterized pretty negatively in recent reporting, and I want to push back a little on that pessimism, because I think there's actually more nuance here than the headlines are giving credit for. Peyton Watson of the Denver Nuggets. Fox Sports specifically ran a piece with the headline framing a potential Lakers-Peyton Watson union as having devolved into an unrealistic dream. That's a pretty definitive, pretty negative framing, but I actually want to walk through why this specific situation is more conditional and more fluid than that headline suggests, because I think the actual reporting underneath it tells a more interesting story. So let's start with the actual mechanism being discussed here. The specific reporting states that if Denver re-signs Peyton Watson to a multi-year deal, that could actually be what triggers a Denver trade, which could in turn be what actually piques Lakers' interest. Read that back carefully, because I think it's actually the opposite dynamic of what a lot of people assume when they hear unrealistic dream. This isn't saying Denver definitely keeps him and the Lakers definitely miss out. This is describing a specific sequence of events. Denver re-signs him first on a real multi-year commitment, and that very re-signing is what could then create the conditions for a subsequent trade discussion. That's a genuinely different, more nuanced story than simple pessimism. Let's talk about why Denver would even be in a position where re-signing a player leads directly to trading him, because I think understanding that mechanic is key to understanding whether this is actually realistic or not. Denver, like a lot of contending teams built around expensive stars, you're talking about a roster that has to pay Jokic, has to pay Jamal Murray, has real financial commitments across their core, often runs into genuine luxury tax and roster flexibility pressure themselves. If Watson, a young, athletic, defensive-minded wing who's shown real flashes of two-way upside during his time in Denver, gets a significant new contract, that same contract that reflects his real value could simultaneously become the exact reason Denver needs to create financial flexibility elsewhere, potentially by moving him or another significant piece to stay under specific tax thresholds while still fielding a competitive roster around their stars. That's actually a pretty common pattern around the league. A team develops a promising young player, that player's new contract reflects real, earned value, and the very success that justified that contract creates a roster construction problem that sometimes gets solved by trading the player who just proved his worth. It's counterintuitive, but it happens more than casual fans realize, specifically because contending teams built around one or two max-level stars often have very little margin for paying multiple players significant money simultaneously. Now let's talk about why Watson specifically would be such a compelling target for the Lakers if this sequence actually plays out. He's a genuinely elite athlete, a real switchable defensive wing who's shown flashes of guarding multiple positions at a high level, exactly the kind of two-way player this roster has been searching for all offseason to pair alongside Luka and Reeves, neither of whom profiles as a lockdown individual defender. And unlike some of the other names we've discussed in this series, Watson is genuinely young, still developing, with real long-term upside rather than being a proven but limited veteran rotation piece. If the Lakers are thinking not just about this season, but about building a sustainable core around Luka for the next 5 to 7 years, a young, ascending two-way wing like Watson represents a fundamentally different kind of value proposition than a Klay Thompson or a Kyle Kuzma type addition. Let's be honest about the offensive limitations here too though, because I don't want to oversell this. Watson, at this stage of his development, is still primarily a play finisher and defensive presence rather than a genuine shot creator. He's shown real improvement as a three-point shooter, which matters enormously for spacing purposes next to Luka, but he's not the kind of player who's going to independently generate offense the way some of the other names we've discussed can. His value is much more about what he does without the ball. Cutting, finishing lobs, defending at a high level, than what he does with it in his own hands. And honestly, I actually think that specific profile might fit even better next to Luka than some of the more ball-dominant options we've discussed in this series. Luka doesn't need another player who wants the ball in his hands. He needs complementary pieces who can space the floor, finish plays he creates, and hold up defensively on the other end while he's doing the heavy offensive lifting. Watson's specific skill set, elite cutting, real perimeter shooting development, legitimate defensive versatility, is almost a textbook complementary profile for exactly what a Luka-centric offense actually needs from its role players. Now let's talk about the realistic timeline here, because I think this is where the unrealistic dream framing actually has some real merit, even if I disagree with the overall pessimistic conclusion. This entire scenario is contingent on Denver first re-signing Watson to a new deal, which hasn't happened yet, and then subsequently deciding, likely months down the road, once that new contract's actual financial impact becomes clearer in the context of their full roster, that they need to move him. That's a multi-step process that could easily take until the trade deadline in February, or even into next offseason, to actually play out, if it plays out at all. This is not a situation where Lakers fans should be expecting a resolution in the next few weeks, the way some of the other names in this series might resolve. But here's why I don't think unrealistic is quite the right word for it, even with that extended timeline. Complicated, multi-step, contingent on specific financial dominoes falling in a particular order. Sure, absolutely, all of that is true. But those are exactly the kinds of scenarios that smart, patient front offices specifically track and position themselves to capitalize on when the actual conditions align, rather than dismissing outright as impossible. If I'm the Lakers front office, I'm not actively pursuing Peyton Watson right now because he's not actually available right now. But I am absolutely keeping tabs on Denver's roster situation, keeping tabs on how that Watson extension actually gets structured if and when it happens, and staying ready to move if the specific trade opportunity this reporting describes actually materializes down the road. Let's also think about what the Lakers would realistically need to give up here, because that matters for how seriously to actually take this as a realistic path. A young, ascending two-way wing with real defensive versatility and legitimate long-term value is not the kind of player Denver would move for spare parts, even under real tax pressure. This would likely require the Lakers to attach real value. A genuine, protected first-round pick, possibly a young player with real upside of their own, rather than the more marginal, salary-matching type packages we discussed for names like Obi Toppin. That's a meaningfully bigger commitment, both in terms of assets and organizational conviction, than some of the other targets in this series. So here's my honest overall evaluation. I think this is genuinely the highest ceiling name in this entire series of videos, in terms of what he could actually become as a long-term piece next to Luka Doncic. But I also think it's the least immediately realistic in terms of actual timeline and asset cost, precisely because it requires a specific sequence of events on Denver's side that hasn't happened yet and might not happen at all if Denver simply decides to keep him and manage their tax situation elsewhere on the roster instead. If I'm ranking these 5 names purely on immediate realism for this specific offseason, Watson is probably at the bottom of that list. But if I'm ranking them on pure long-term fit and upside next to Luka Doncic specifically, I think he might actually be at the top. That's the trade-off Lakers fans need to understand here. This is a name worth genuinely tracking over the medium term, but not one to expect resolution on anytime soon. So that wraps up this whole series. Real quick recap for anybody who's caught all 5 of these. Kuminga represents a stalled but probably eventually resolved negotiation with real upside but real fit risk. Klay Thompson represents a likely lower cost bench addition contingent on Dallas's buyout leverage finally breaking. Kuzma represents a sensible if unspectacular value-based reunion that solves a real roster crunch problem. Toppin represents a quietly compelling, tax-motivated trade opportunity that might not heat up until closer to the season, and Watson represents the highest long-term ceiling but the least immediate realism of anybody we've covered. Anyway, as always, this is a discussion. I pass the question to you, out of all 5 names across this series, who's the one you'd actually want the Lakers to prioritize first? Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button, helps me a lot, so you enjoy these types of videos, truly appreciate it. And subscribe to the channel, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate you, I'll see you in the next one, thank you.